Hello, folks. Welcome back to Learn Synthesis with Ableton Live. I'm your host, Dr. Lawrence W. Moore of the Wayfarer Project. This is Series 1, Episode 2. In Episode 1, we looked at the frequency spectrum and those things that go into making up the frequency spectrum of a sound: overtones, undertones, harmonics, and partials. We also looked at the 4 basic wave shapes and how harmonics define their unique characteristics and their sounds. In this episode, we are going to go ahead with the instrument operator in Ableton and learn its different components, because it has an array of components in it that are standard basic synthesizer components that we need to learn at the start before we can start developing different types of sounds. In other words, we need to know what our tools do before we build something. So in any event, I received a comment after the first episode from Aaron, who said he would like to see something about digital sampling. That was something that I mentioned in the first episode when I was talking about a little bit about digital audio, and that I'm not going to go into the sampling conversion process right here, but I am looking for clarification on the comment, because if it is about the digital, the analog to digital conversion process, I would like to make that video, but I'll make that in a different series, a different video, and put it in a different playlist, kind of like a miscellaneous playlist or something like that. But if the request was really about sampling, as far as recording audio clips and then triggering them, like with a keyboard, for example, recording different notes of an instrument and then having different keys on the keyboard trigger those notes, or something like that, because the word sampling is used multiple ways in music, and if that's the request, that will be in this series coming up later. We'll work with a sampler. But for now, yeah, I encourage questions and anything that would be constructive and helps people learn in the series. Suggestions, recommendations are always welcome. Of course, as I said, questions, or if you just want to say hello, that's always welcome too. It's good to have feedback. I would like this series to be an interactive one, if we can all do that. So in any event, I'm going to stop waffling on here and we're going to get started. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be working with operator. So I'm going to zoom in here. And let's see here. Let's go to instruments. Oh, I had something in the search up here. Yeah. Got to clear that. And then operator is right here. Hit the double click and it'll load it up on our one and only MIDI track. Alrighty. For those who are new to Ableton, you can create tracks by right-clicking and going to create audio or MIDI. Right now we're working with MIDI tracks, which is what you can load up instruments on. And when one's selected, you could select an instrument from the list by double-clicking it, and it will come up here. Okay, so operator. I know last time I said we'll probably be doing analog this time. But I decided operator actually might be a better one to start with, even though operator can be used to make some very complex sounds, and so it can be something that's more advanced. It has a simple layout that I think would be good to start with, and I can explain a lot of the basic concepts here. Basically, we're going to be going over oscillators, envelopes, LFO, and filtering, which is a good deal of what synthesis is about. But basically, I'm going to introduce what they are this time, and then in for later episodes, we'll be making different types of sounds and sound types, but we need to know what these things are and how to access them in Ableton before we can do that. The first thing I'm going to do is down here, you know, just to the right of the black screen in the center, there's oscillator arrangement selector, basically, or an algorithm selector. And what we're going to use now is this one here. By default, it has this one here where basically oscillators A through D basically feed into each other. D, C, B into A. Like D feeds into C, C feeds into B, B, C feeds into A. And that tends to be used for FM synthesis and more complex sounds. We're starting simpler, so we want this arrangement here, where the 4 oscillators are parallel with each other. Here's our 4 oscillators over here, lettered A, B, C, D. And by default, A is the one that's set up first. If you click in the space around this general area for oscillator A, this row, you see how it highlights light gray as opposed to the dark gray of the other ones. That means this oscillator is selected and everything here corresponds to oscillator A. The center view, when you select an oscillator, will then put up the information about the oscillator's envelope and the information about the oscillator, depending on whether you click and highlight the box. So this is what we were looking at last time to see that, okay, we have a sine wave oscillator here. That's the shape of a sine wave. And here's its name. And then here is the indication that we just have one frequency being played called the fundamental. Also known as harmonic 1, because technically the fundamental is a harmonic. But let's call up another wave shape here. Last time we compared the sounds and the harmonics, but for me to illustrate some other things, I'd like to use a more complex shape, like maybe the SAW 64, where we have 64 harmonics. The fundamental, and then each harmonic overtone is 1 divided by its harmonic number in order. Like harmonic 2 is 1 over 2 in strength. Now visually it doesn't look that way. It doesn't look like it's 1/2 of this, because this diagram here has been altered in a way so that you could draw in strengths up here and still be able to see what you're doing. Because 1 over 2 means halfway down, 1 over 3 means about here, 1 over 4 about here, 1 over 5 about here, 1 over 6. Pretty soon it gets too short for someone to be able to draw in harmonic strengths easily. So there's a bit of an adjustment made to the view so that way, still trust me when I tell you. Overtone 2 in a sawtooth wave, or harmonic overtone 2 in a sawtooth wave, is half strength compared to the fundamental, 1 over 3, 1 over 4, 1 over 5, just like we talked about in episode 1. So now, this is the oscillator section. I can talk about some of these things later as we get into other aspects of synthesis. But for now, let's just talk about the oscillator and the envelope. Now, the envelope section is what governs, in this case, it governs the amplitude of the sound over time. Basically, when I press this key, which is A440, what is being done is the software is taking this shape, an inverse ramp shape, but that's what an actual sawtooth shape looks like. It's taking this shape, and since this A has a frequency of 440 hertz or 440 cycles per second, it's basically repeating this shape 440 times per second. If we were to record it in and zoom in here in the track view, we would see a waveform that has like basically 440 of these per second. I don't want to take the time to do that. Just maybe use your imagination. We could record something later and look at the waveform just to kind of get a perspective on that, but right now, just imagine there'll be 440 of these per second. Of course, being zoomed out as we are here, and this being in measures and beats, basically you wouldn't see the individual oscillations unless you really zoomed in. We did some of that last time, actually, now that I think of it. So we did see a zoomed in sawtooth waveform. But anyway, that's what the oscillator does, and then its envelope basically shapes it in loudness over time. And we'll be able to hear that if we work with this a little bit. Envelopes can be used for multiple things, and we will be using them for multiple things. But right now, one of the basic uses of an envelope is to shape a sound over time. Now that, I accidentally clicked another oscillator. Well, let's say here our oscillator A. We have a shape over time that will be executed when I press the key. This first portion is called the attack. And down here under attack, it lists its time in milliseconds. I could even type it in. Right now it says 2.11 milliseconds. So that's pretty quick. When I hit the key, it rises to its peak amplitude pretty quickly. If I double click it like that, it goes to 0.00 milliseconds, which it's hard to tell the difference because milliseconds are, 1 millisecond is 1/1000th of a second. So 2.11 is not going to be long. Let's put this at 1000 milliseconds. That's a 1 second fade in, basically. All right. Now, in the interest of not having to wait every time we play it, let's change this to something like 100 milliseconds. There's still 3 zeros there. So double click it, then type 100. Double clicking like resets it. 100. It's a tenth of a second, but you could still hear a bit of a rise there. Always use your ear in this stuff because the diagrams can sometimes be, a little bit misleading. Like if I put it here, we wouldn't hear a big difference, but it looks visually like a big difference. We got 50? Yeah. And actually 50 is half of 100, but it doesn't look like it moved it over halfway. So it can be a little misleading. I mean, it gives you a good indication of things, but use your ear, in other words, when doing this. So the attack is how quickly the sound comes in from silence when you press the key to what we would call the peak amplitude. And actually, I'm going to move that all the way up there. Under attack, here is its attack time in milliseconds. And then over here, this is the peak, where you define what the peak is. And this would be relative to your level over here and your output level from the module overall here. But it would be relative to that, but basically this would be like full blast for what your settings of level and volume are. And then also you have your, let me bring that view back. Then also you have your mixer fader here, which comes later. Basically this is the level of the oscillator. This is the output level of this instrument. And this is the level in your mix that you can set over here. So there's 3 different stages to that. Okay, so let's get back to this here. All right, so we're rising to our full peak amplitude. Amplitude being, in digital world, it's kind of like the thickness vertically of your waveform. And it directly impacts how loud we hear the sound. So You hear that? There's a difference by bringing that amplitude level down. So this is considered to be the peak, because usually what happens is then you take the next segment and pull it down from that a bit. This segment here is called the decay. This is attack, decay. And basically the decay also has its own time setting down here. And it's basically decreasing from the peak. So the attack is here. And the attack time is how long it takes to get to here. That's what this setting is. The decay is how long it takes to get to here. And the peak is your peak amplitude of the envelope right there. And initial, that will be this, but typically, as it says here, negative infinity dB, meaning all the way down. Mathematically, that's just the correct way of putting it. But you could kind of think of it as 0, but mathematically, technically, dB, you would say negative infinity. Okay, and then sustain, that's this portion right here. This is the portion when I'm holding the note. So did you hear that little pa? That was the peak amplitude, and then the decay time lowering down to here, which overall is pretty quick. If we take our decay and type in 1,000, 1 second. We also maybe want to make this a little quicker so it's more pronounced. So I'm going to just double click this and make it instantaneous. It didn't sound like 1 second to me, but then again, this is a curve here, an exponential curve. So it's basically going down faster at first until it gets here. Let's do 2 seconds. Now you can hear a bit of the slide, or a bit of the reduction, so to speak. Okay, so attack portion, decay portion, and this is a sustain portion. Typically what you define in a sustain is not the time, because you're holding down the key, and the sustain ends when you release the key. So here sustain is listed in dB, or basically amplitude, of how loud it is in comparison to the peak amplitude. And typically we use the envelope this way, so there's a bit of an articulation at the beginning of a note, and then it lasts however long the decay time is, and it settles in at the sustain level. Now that I raise this a bit, you hear less of a difference between the peak and the sustain level. Now you hear even more, but that peak at the beginning is kind of short, you know, and they typically are. Just kind of like making articulation of a note at the beginning of it. Now, here we have, I wanted to do release first, finish the envelope. Oh, here it is, right in front of my face. Okay, the release portion of the envelope is here. Like when you release the key, how quickly does it go to negative infinity dB again? Let's say, let's make it a whole second, which will be long, actually. So you hear that fade out. Once again, it is an exponential curve, so it kind of starts fading pretty quickly until it eventually does fade out. So if you want it to be longer, you can increase the time on it. So just bear that in mind. 1,000 milliseconds is 1 second. So when you type in 1,000, it'll say 1.0 seconds. So that's a way of kind of gauging the time that you want these different sections to be. And you get used to it after a while, and kind of having an idea of how quick things sound at different levels of milliseconds. Since 1,000 milliseconds is a second, you could think of it as 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1/5 of a second. You know, think of it as fractional amounts of a second, and that helps to start. Okay, and then let's see, sustain, and then there's velocity here. Velocity is the speed at which you hit a key in MIDI. There, I'm hitting the key pretty hard and fast, and now I'm going to be slow. You hear a big difference in amplitude. Well, probably we'll hear an even bigger one if we put this at 100%. So I'm going to hit it soft again. Oh, that's real soft. And then I hit it hard again. Yeah, oh, yeah, big difference. Let's keep it at 50. But this is a good way for you when making a sound or an instrument, trying to gauge the consistency of level. Like, how sensitive to velocity do you want it to be in your playing in of notes on the keyboard? Or if you record things in when you actually work with velocity values in the edit, the graphic editor or piano roll, when you're editing there, this will have an effect. If you're completely new to MIDI, maybe I should do a series on MIDI, you know? Let me know in the comment section. Yeah, I mean, in time I probably will anyway, but let's see how urgently it's requested. So anyway, yeah, and so we have our oscillators and we have our envelope. Now, we have multiple oscillators here. Okay, let's add a second oscillator. So, yeah, I didn't mean to turn it off. So when you select B, you want it to be indicated here, the box highlighted. And they all are, but these three have their levels turned all the way down. So what you can do is turn its level up. And now we'll hear a B oscillator too. Differentiate it. You see, its envelope is going to be different than A's. Well, not much. We have a quick attack. Let's do this. Let's have B fade in later. And then since it's going to be a longer fade in, let's have it fade into the sustain level and not really have a peak at the beginning. We're only going to have that with A because A is going to sound first and then B is going to gradually come in. And B is a sine wave right now. Let's see if it's audible. Not really, because a sine wave has no spectrum to it. We're not going to hear it so great. But what we can do here is detune it, for example. And typically when you're using multiple oscillators together, parallel with one another, you're using it with a bit of detuning. Here we have coarse and fine, which means how much of a change in pitch do you want in detuning the oscillator. This may be at 1, but there is one below that, 0.5. Basically, 1 means you're on the octave of the key that you're playing. And 0.5 means that you are half that, which means the octave below. So now we should hear a sine tone below our A440. It got louder as it faded in. You notice that? That's a long fade. Yeah, 20 seconds. Oh, yeah. See, I told you. Visually, this could be really misleading. I was like, man. Yeah, that's taking some time there. So let's do it like half a second, 500 milliseconds. You see how visually it's not a big difference, but it's an amazing difference between half a second and 20 seconds. Now, that's just so we could kind of hear and see that you can put on different envelopes. But what I am going to do is let's set these envelopes a little bit more methodically here. All right, the K we'll say is 100 milliseconds in time. Release will make you 500 milliseconds in time. And our sustain level will be negative 18 dB, should be fine. Now let's go to B and make it a more useful envelope, maybe like the same. Double click that, it initializes it to 0.0. Decay 100 milliseconds is what I did. And then the release time will make this the same amount as the other one, 500 milliseconds. And here, peak, we can type in negative 18. Oh, not peak, that's sustain. Peak, 0. 0.0 dB means no change. In dB, even in mixing here, we're dealing with 0 dB, meaning the full strength of all the parameter settings, basically, and basically you just subtract from that to reduce things. Think of 0 dB as your max. That's so you're not distorting in the digital world. Now, just to show you, you can do some other settings. I'm going to do this. We have our octave below here. Maybe this will be a little bit better organized if I do it this way. Let's make our octave below here. Let's make it a sine wave. It's good to have sine waves on the bottom. That's a conventional usage for them to provide like some sub audio or bass tone to it. And then we're going to go to this tuning here and change this oscillator and make this one a bit more interesting. How about we could do a triangle wave, which is a little bit, it's got a few harmonics on it. The way they do it here, typically it would continue going up, but you know, it's 1 over the harmonic number squared and only the odd harmonics. There we go. Now, why don't we do this? Let's do another triangle wave here. Sorry, moving over too far. Triangle. There we go. And now we're going to use our coarse tuning, just so I could show you here. In the coarse tuner, this is multiplying by whatever. Think of 1 as that's going to be doing the frequency of the note you're playing. So if it's A440, it's playing 440. 2 would be doubling that, 880. 3 would be tripling it, 1320, I believe. So it's basically like the harmonic spectrum. Oh, I need to turn up the level of this oscillator. There we go. That sounds pretty good, but maybe that is a little bit high. Harmonic 4 is another octave, so these will be 3 A's in a row. A220, A440, and then 4 times 40, 1760 in hertz. So there we go. Now what you also have, I'm going to put this back down to 1 and do some fine tuning. You have the fine tuning here, which allows you to basically do some tuning within the harmonics. So basically you turn this up if you want to go up the octave to 2, you know, 2 times whatever your frequency is that you're playing. This is for in between that. Now, fixed is something you can check off if you want one of these oscillators to be the frequency that you set just with its dials. So let me just do this with the bottom one. And let's say, now it'll maintain that as a drone as I play other notes. Alrighty, so that's what you would use that for. Turn that off, and we're back to the way we were. Now, fine tuning, a lot of times I prefer one that has a middle setting and you go to either side. But this one, it's 0 and goes up. Let me just try something here. Let's try 0.5. Okay. Like, let's put this on 0, this one on 1. What I want to do is this one's going to be a little bit above the note. A440. Tune this up. And take this one and get this close. So now this one's a little bit above 440, this one's a little bit below. Actually, I'm not playing A40, 440 right now, but just imagine I was. There we go. There it is. That's it. And what we get here is a chorusing effect. Basically, when two oscillators are oscillating at frequencies that are slightly off from one another, and you hear a beating sound, that little modulation sound in the middle there. That's basically them being slightly off from one another. If you get, there's a sweet spot. If you go too far, it sounds like just dissonance, like two incompatible frequencies. And then when you go far enough, you can make it a certain interval, a musical interval, like a minor third or a perfect fourth, perfect fifth apart. Let's do something like that rather than this. So I'm going to turn you down there, put you back on 1, and there we go. There we go. So now we have a sound that we're using that actually I should check the envelope on this third oscillator. Maybe make it about the same. 100. Release time 500. And the peak value zeros. And the sustain -18. Now they line up together better. They sound a little more consistent. Sorry about that. My mouse got out of my control. My mouse doesn't like me. So now let's look at some other things over here. We have something called an LFO, which stands for low frequency oscillator. These are just called oscillators. They're basically oscillators to create frequencies, basically oscillate at a frequency within the range of our hearing. And last time we talked about that being 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz. 20 cycles per second up to 20,000 cycles per second, or 20,000 of these per second. Now, most of us don't hear up to 20,000 hertz. That would just be ideal. You got perfect ears, you're young, and you haven't listened to a lot of loud music, and so forth. And it's also something that, just like vision, varies from person to person. And then 20 hertz being the lowest that we can hear, but a lot of us maybe only hear down to 25 or 30, something like that. So anyway, LFO is basically, you wouldn't hear this oscillator, or the highest frequency that LFOs typically would do would just barely enter the audio range. Some LFOs go higher than others, but typically what this is used for is to provide a modulation or an effect. So if we turn it on, we can hear it right there. It's basically oscillating 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4, something like that. Its rate here is set to 100. Now, that's not 100 oscillations per second. The range here is obviously not cycles per second, because we wouldn't be able to, it would be vibrating too fast for us to hear the individual. It sounds more like 4 or 5, I don't know. But here, let's slow it down. Speed it up. Here's its shape. A sine, of course, is going to be kind of like that nice rolling round sine wave. Sine and triangle would sound similar. It's just instead of a curved thing, the triangle is kind of up, slanted up and then slanted down in a linear line. The square is kind of like an on-off, because it goes up and down, up and down, up and down. Alrighty, so you have your different shapes here. Saw will be ramping. Saw up would be a ramp up, and then dropping down. Let's slow it down. So you hear it ramping up, and saw down would be the opposite. Sample and hold. Yeah, you hear that? It is moving. I guess there's a certain algorithm to how it moves, but sample and hold pretty much means go to a value, hold it until you're told to move to another value. Let's just go back to sine. All right, and then we have a mount. That's basically how high or low in frequency it is oscillating our pitch. Let's just leave it on something like that. I'm basically trying to use it as like a vibrato right now. But what we have over here is an envelope for our LFO. As long as LFO is highlighted, this window will give us, well, let's type it in. It's much more accurate this way. So let's say I want the vibrato to start after half a second. You'd say 500 milliseconds there. It'll rise to this point. Let's make it Ooh, yeah, let's actually have the peak not be a peak. Let's make it -18. And then over the decay time, to make it sound more natural like a vibrato, our decay time is going to be, let's make it a second. And make the sustain value actually 0.0. So basically, it comes in to this level of oscillation, because that's what this envelope is covering now. This envelope is shaping the amount of oscillation. So it's going to fade in over 500 milliseconds, then over another second, it'll get faster. And then it won't release until you release with the sustain. Maybe what we should do to sound more realistic is have a longer release time. Let's change our release to 1 second. But our amplitude envelopes are releasing faster, so that one doesn't get to go all the way because the note is being released before our LFO envelope gets its chance to finish. So I'm going to make them the same amount of time here in these envelopes. There we go. Now let's go back to the LFO. You hear it kind of slow down as it fades out. Alrighty, so that's, I'm just showing and giving a tour here. I'm not trying to design a great sound at this point. That will be happening. Oh, we're still going to proceed from simpler to more complex, but in the next episode, we will try to use operator to make a cool sound. In this episode, it's showing what things are. Okay, and so here we have, yeah, and it actually has an LFO thing here where you can select what gets oscillated. We can, for example, just have our low octave sine wave be oscillated by turning off the rest of the oscillators here. If you listen closely, you can hear that the vibrato is only in the low octave. You may need to be listening with headphones or good speakers to hear this, like built-in speaker, and the headphone may not be, I mean, built-in speaker, unlike a cell phone, may not carry this. Let's play a higher note. There we go. So the rest of the oscillators are not being affected. You can also set a destination for your LFO. And this we explore more and more as we go on. Right now, I think what I'm going to do is proceed to filter, and then we could come back to this and set it to the filter. Okay, so the next and pretty much the last thing that we're going to introduce in this is the filter, which is already turned on here, but we're not hearing it because its frequency value is all the way up. Now what I want to show here is, you see this little shape here where it's a line and then it slopes down to the right. This is just kind of like a little symbol that means low pass. And what that means is the flat line means everything below a certain point passes, and the curve to the right means frequencies above a certain point do not pass. But there's a little slope to it, so some of them pass, and then as you go higher in frequency, they get cut off. Well, that's this knob here for setting it. And for seeing this visually, I am going to go over here to audio effects and get out our friend's spectrum, so we can see the frequency spectrum. There we are. Double click it. Now, I'm going to try to get the right zoom amount here so that I can go over here, and I'm going to lower this frequency. Right now, with the frequency turned all the way up, what it's saying is pass all frequencies below this point. If it's all the way up, it's basically passing all the frequencies. So you don't hear any filtering. Here's our note and our harmonics. And remember, we have some oscillators that are pitched up an octave, so we're seeing more harmonics than we would if we didn't have multiple oscillators. So now I'm going to click on frequency here and turn this down. You see how these drop down here? You see some of them aren't completely cut out, but they're reduced, and then up to this point there, for all intents and purposes, cut. And the point at which that cutoff, and that's its term, cutoff frequency, the point at which that is located, I can at least from the diagram tell it's somewhere around here that it slopes down, right around here. We can add resonance to that area, which means we're going to let the frequencies in that area where the cutoff is stand out. That's basically our cutoff frequency. But resonance is some way of kind of like adding a little extra color to this area here. Now watch the spectrum as I turn the resonance up. I'm going to turn it up all the way, and you'll see a spike that gets even taller than the fundamental. Oh, it looks like our resonance is here, because the cutoff curve must be beginning here and going down like that. It's a bit of a slope. Now, as you hear, when you turn the resonance up, it basically backs off on basically the rest of the sound. Well, first of all, things above the cutoff are going to be being cut out if they're far enough above it, because there is a slope to it. But things below also get somewhat attenuated, and that's why that spike was higher than the fundamental. Now, look at the fundamental, the leftmost spike, and then the one just next to it. As I turn the frequency up, you'll see that spike move. All right. You actually see all the rest of them kind of fluctuate too as it goes past. Now, one other thing to describe here, you usually have some settings for, well, on physical synthesizers, this is usually something that's just the nature of the synthesizer, whether it's a 12 or 24 dB filter. But this means largely how extreme the resonance is going to be. If I reduce this, you hear how it's standing out strong, but everything else is quieter. Well, now listen, as I click this, you'll hear the rest of the sound come up a little bit louder. There you go. And actually largely it's the frequencies above the cutoff frequency that I'm hearing coming back in. So that's really the difference. 12 dB reduction or 24 dB reduction. The higher number meaning more reduction. Alrighty, so let's go back here since we have our LFO, and we can give it a destination. Let's see if we can find our filter frequency right there. And remember, this LFO has an envelope on it. That's why it's speeding up or actually getting more prominent gradually after the note's pressed. Alrighty then, so you see how you have these different things for routing and stuff like that, and that's a common thing, is to be able to route different things to your filter to manipulate it. It could be, and you can have these things like basically respond to the mod wheel and things like that as well, or respond to your velocity, how quickly you hit the keys, and stuff like that. So all these different things can be overall manipulated and triggered by different other things, which is all part of the magic of synthesis. So this episode I'm drawing to a close now. If you felt this useful or it helped you get to sleep at night, please hit that like button and leave a comment if you have questions or requests or you have some suggestions. Anything constructive that helps people learn is welcome, or just a shout out just to keep me from feeling lonely. That would be welcome as well. Let me take a picture of this for the, no, I didn't mean to do that, for the thumbnail. There we go. And next time what we're going to do is we'll still work with operator, but we are going to do trying to make a couple of basic sound types that are common in synthesis. I haven't selected exactly which ones yet, but we're going to be kind of like simple about it and get used to working with operator a little bit more. Maybe I'll even call up a preset and we'll look at operator to see how the different characteristics of that preset are being achieved by what's being done here. Now remember, we will be at some point soon moving on to also using multiple instruments like this in the instrument rack where you combine them together. And that's where you can really, and have them interact with each other there. And that's where you can really draw on the power of Ableton Live, where you can combine things in all sorts of different ways. But anyway, thank you for joining me. And until next time, take care and stay free.